Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, and welcome to the session. And we have some eminent speakers from Sabin Vaccine Institute, and we have Chika, who's our moderator, and Tiffany, who's also our moderator. It's really a pleasure to be here, and we're very excited about the session. So without any further ado, we will start and ask Chika to take the floor. So Chika, over to you.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here. And then, by the way, we're all looking very good. So it's going to be a very wonderful session. So before we start, we have ground rules. So the ground rules are very simple, not many. On the chat box, type your name, the country you're from, and the city. It will be good so that we can know. And then please participate actively. Tell us your points, tell us what you want to say. If you have any questions, please feel free to contribute in any way. We need your inputs to make it robust and very, very interesting. From Sabin Institute, Elizabeth is going to be talking to us about this very wonderful session. Elizabeth from the Boost community of Sabin Institute, talking about the misinformation and a strategic approach towards this misinformation. So before I talk too much, I will hand over to Elizabeth to dive in.
Great, thanks. And
Elizabeth, by the way, is from the Sabin Vaccine Institute as well.
Wonderful, thanks so
much. Please go on.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Well, welcome everyone. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome on behalf of Sabin and the Boost community. I know you've heard a little bit about the Boost community already, but so I won't kind of spend time on that, but do invite you to check out our platform and join if you haven't already. It's boostcommunity.org. So today we're actually going to be presenting a webinar that was previously recorded in October. This is part one of a three-part series on vaccine misinformation. It's a series that was hosted by Sabin, Sabin's Vaccine Acceptance and Demand team, the Boost community, and it was a really popular series. We had nearly 300 people join us for the first webinar. Since it is a very timely topic, I know we've heard a lot about it during the conference thus far on misinformation. And definitely needing strategies to combat misinformation, especially with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. So even though this is a recorded webinar, feel free to share your questions in the chat. We'll get to them. We also have a number of resources that I'll share after we share the part of the recording. I'll also note that this is just a section of the first webinar. We'll also be sharing out the link to the entire series. You can actually go back and review as well. We also have included a few poll questions. So kind of at your convenience throughout the recording, feel free to answer those as well. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll see if we can go ahead and start playing the recording from the beginning.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Misinformation may be fake. The consequence of misinformation is real and poses a serious threat to public health. The introduction of HPV vaccine in Kenya in October 2019, for example, was met with myths and misconceptions, which overall contributed to a slow acceptance and uptake of the HPV vaccine, as some parents took a wait and this example presents just one of the many challenges that immunization professionals, including many members of the Boost community, grapple with, and therefore calls for knowledge to expand our understanding of the problem, as well as identify tools in order to develop contextualized solutions to address it. This webinar on vaccine misinformation control and prevention is part one of 3 webinar series. Sabin Vaccine Institute and UNICEF are collaborating on information sharing and learning effort to broaden understanding of the impact of misinformation on vaccine acceptance and hesitancy, and to better equip immunization professionals to manage this impact. Upcoming webinar topics will be on infodemiology in practice and inoculation against misinformation. We'll provide more information on these sessions later in this presentation, and also in our follow-up to attendees. We also hope that if you've not joined, if you haven't joined Boost community already, you sign up and join the ongoing conversations with other immunization professionals. I would also like to tell you that we are tweeting. Follow Sabin on Twitter at Sabin Vaccine and tag Sabin when you tweet. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we have a few instructions. Mute yourself to limit the background noise and feedback. Also, raise your hand during the discussion to speak. The raise hand button is below your screen. Also, ensure that you submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A question located at the bottom of your screen as well. You can also respond to questions and engage through the chat at the bottom of your screen. Use the chat button to introduce yourself in the chat. Continue introducing yourself. I'm monitoring the chats. So without further ado, we have three panelists with us today. We have Aisha Durrani, Communication for Development Specialist, Health Section in the UNICEF Pakistan Country Office. In addition, we also have Jonathan Shadid, the Chief Communication for Development, UNICEF Pakistan Country Office. Last but not least, we have Angus Thompson, a Senior Social Scientist, Demand for Immunization, UNICEF. So we are going to launch a poll question. It's going to appear on your screen. So the poll question is, what do we mean by misinformation? We have around 30 seconds to answer this. What do we mean by misinformation? We have around 30 seconds. As we answer the question, let's remember to use the chat box to introduce ourselves. Thank you. So around 25% say that intentionally false and misleading information. And we have 68% saying that information that is false, but not necessarily intentionally false. Then we have 8% of us saying false rumors. So the correct answer is B. Misinformation is information that is false, but not necessarily intentionally false. So Angus is going to talk through what we mean by misinformation and disinformation pertaining to vaccines, some strategies his team is developing to debunk and manage misinformation, and soon some resources that will be shared by UNICEF. Angus is going to share his screen. So if you have a question, kindly use the Q&A button to share your question, and we are going to respond to the questions as they come. Thank you. Angus, take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today from all around the world, it seems. What I'd like to do is take you on a little trip through what we know about the evidence, what the evidence tells us about misinformation, disinformation, and its potential impact on people's vaccine-related decisions. And then look at what it is that we know so far that might help us tackle this. So we have solutions, we have potential tools out there, and we hear a lot about this problem and perhaps a little less about what it is that we can do about it. So bear with me, I want to give you a little bit of background. I've got you for about 20-25 minutes on this part of the flight. Reasonably quickly, but try to keep things clear.
And I'm actually going to come back to that question that we had about the definition of misinformation in a second. But this is not news to anyone, I guess. We really have had this parallel so-called epidemic with the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic now. So this is, as Tedros noted We're not just fighting the epidemic, we're fighting the infodemic, and fake news spreads faster and more easily than the virus. And it's just as dangerous. And these are very true words, and I'll show you why they're true in a minute. Two numbers. Early on in the pandemic, our UNICEF's partners, Public Good Projects in their Project Vector detected a doubling of vaccine critical messages within the first months of the pandemic. Those messages being viewed over 4 billion times. Another study, and this is just a sample, identified a small but very, very effective network of anti-vax profiteers, people who are profiting from anti-vaccine disinformation, who managed within the pandemic to increase their followers by 1 million people. And this is a $1 billion industry, or that's what the Center for Countering Digital Hate estimated. So the pandemic has certainly been having an impact on vaccination. Indeed, vaccines, immunization has been sucked into this perfect storm of disinformation. I'm not going to go in this in detail, but as early as March, we were detecting a rumor that would turn out to have real traction throughout the Francophone world, was additionally fueled by comments coming out of France, and is still circulating and mutating, taking on new forms, but has a core theme, which is that COVID-19 vaccines are being tested on people in Africa without their knowledge. So as I move to the definitions, please, in the next couple of minutes, let us know in a few words what kind of misinformation or disinformation you might be encountering most frequently in your work. First of all, we're interested to know, are you encountering it? And secondly, if yes, what does it look like? And use the chat feature for that, please. So a few definitions. First of all, information. Those of us in behavior change understand that throwing information over the fence doesn't have any impact on people's behaviors. What changes our knowledge and eventually potentially our behaviors is information that is data with meaning, that is trusted, is actionable, and is sticky. It stays within our worldview, within the way we see the world. And I'll come back to what I mean by that. Misinformation, as most of us got, is unintentional falsehoods that are circulating out there. These can dilute, they can distract, they can distort. They can make it difficult for people to start to triangulate the truth, particularly in the social networks in which this circulates. But a very important distinction is disinformation. So these two words are very distinct in English. Disinformation is deliberately engineered falsehoods. It is weaponized misinformation. It is misinformation that is designed to deceive you, designed to stick within your beliefs, and designed to make you spread it, very much like a virus. It is falsehoods that are created and disseminated using deceitful tactics and with malicious intent. And this is important because what I'm telling you now is one of the keys to the way that we might be able to address disinformation. It in fact comes from, we think, the Russian word that was coined in the 1920s when the Kremlin set up a disinformation institute. And it is now being used, created and used quite widely, and obviously we'll get to social networks, but they are helping with the spread. But the question that any behavioral scientist should ask is, so what? Does it have any impact on people's perceptions or on their behaviors? And the answer is, at least in some people, yes. So I've been waiting for months to be able to use my word of the year, Hamsterkauf, which is a German word that is a combination of hamster and shopping and means hoarding behaviors, and which I've used often in my daily life. People who believed in one study that coronavirus was actually an engineered bioweapon were more likely to adopt hoarding behaviors. We've seen these super conspiracy theories. 50% of Americans who name Fox News as their primary news source believe Bill Gates is plotting a mass COVID-19 vaccination campaign to implant microchips in billions of people. These people said that they believe this. There are some methodological problems with some of these studies, but we know that there is a substantial proportion of people who at least say that they believe these things. And we know that anti-vaccine conspiracy beliefs may significantly correlate with people's intentions to vaccinate. So disinformation can have a very real impact on people's behaviors. It can be harmful in the real world, and it can impact people's vaccination decisions. So why is this? What's going on? I'm going to give you 2 or 3 key points to remember that are key to the success of misinformation. First of all, it's very sticky. It can stick within our minds, rely on corrected misinformation, even though they've been corrected in their reasoning, even if they've understood and believed and even able to remember the correction that they received. And there are a number of things going on that makes it sticky. I've given you a few examples here. Think to the last time that someone told you you were wrong. How did you feel? Nobody likes to be wrong. And the righting reflex when we tell someone they're wrong and try to correct them can significantly increase people's what we call psychological reactivity. It reduces their receptivity to what it is that we might want to say to them. Fear can backfire. Fear appeals are a double-edged sword and must be carefully used in measured doses. People confuse familiar with truth. Daniel Kahneman put it beautifully: a reliable way to make people believe falsehoods is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from the truth. So we need to limit our repetition of myths. And what's important in particular with vaccination is that often when we try to correct people, it can be taken as a challenge to their very identity. In particular, if that misinformation is not resonant or doesn't fit within the worldview that they find themselves, doesn't fit with their beliefs. And so it's important for us to be thinking about how we can nest our corrections within the, the views, the beliefs of people that we're communicating with. 2 words on vaccination. I'm sure many of us on this call know this. It's a complex behavior, the decision to vaccinate. There is a continuum of vaccination decision-making, from a very small minority of people who refuse all vaccines, a larger group, pending the context, who we call often hesitant. But this is a very diverse group, heterogeneous group. Some may just vaccinate even though they've got questions. Some may accept some vaccines but delay others. Some may refuse a vaccine but not others. We have what we call passive acceptance, where people will accept all but may not be sure about it. And what we're seeking to achieve is to generate at a community level active demand for vaccination. The second thing I'd like you to bear in mind about vaccines in terms of it being a complex behavior is that these are decisions that are sometimes, not always, that may sometimes have very deep roots. So they may be affected more superficially by our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, by cognitive biases, confirmation bias. I see what I believe rather than believing what I see. I reinforce my worldview. Trust, getting a bit more deep, is the bedrock of vaccine acceptance. Very, very important. I'll come back to this theme. Social norms, beliefs, and it can even go as deep as those moral values that we all share. And we have an increasing emerging evidence to show that there are specific moral values that correlate with people's decision making. The point here is that this is complex. This is a complex challenge, and therefore simple solutions will not work. So from vaccines to truth. Time published this in 2018, rather presciently. 2017, is truth dead? I think in an age where we see the president of the world's largest democracy spouting 17, on average, 17 falsehoods a day, we are definitely within what we might call a post-truth era. But this relates, in a sense, to the some of the psychology that I've touched upon, a situation in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and their beliefs rather than one based on facts. We don't like to have our emotions, our beliefs, our values disrupted. And so one of the, a wise philosopher said this a long time ago, and I think it really holds true. You're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. And I'll give people 10 seconds to guess who that philosopher was. Put your answer in the chat. There we go. There's another clue. We'll see if people got it at the end of the talk. Truth and trust are intertwined. We get our truths from people that we trust, from people that we find trustworthy. And for vaccination, this is doubly so, because of the fundamental role that trust plays in the decision-making process that many people go through around vaccines. When we say trustworthy, we're talking about an entity, a person, an organization that is credible, that is expert, but most importantly, is concerned about us, is empathetic. We trust the people who we think have our best interests in heart. And again, I'm giving us, in each of these slides, I'm giving us clues towards the solutions that we might be putting in place to disarm disinformation. Indeed, there's been a recent kind of a model proposed for belief in conspiracy theories that suggests that there is this double whammy of susceptibility to misinformation and mistrust. And I think what I've shown you so far indicates that vaccination, if this is the case, vaccination is particularly vulnerable to disinformation that is able to stick and that is able to undermine people's trust in the trusted messengers. A recent study found that, a very recent study, only published a couple of weeks ago, found that scientists still hold a very, very important role. It was a multinational study, still carry an enormous amount of trust. We know for vaccination that healthcare professionals are always the most trusted voice, but very importantly, we know also that scientists are very trusted voices as well. Now, we've talked about how it sticks. How does it spread? I don't want to spend a lot of time on social platforms today. It's enough to understand the fundamental idea that they were predicated upon. This is a quote from the first president of Facebook. The thought process behind building Facebook was how to consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. A little dopamine hit every once in a while. Yep, when you're liked, when you share something, you get a little dopamine hit because someone liked or commented on a photo or post. It's a social validation feedback loop, dramatically exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. Social platforms are addictive, they're attractive, they're irresistible, and they're all those things by design. Clickbait was designed, it incentivizes attention grabbing, it incentivizes outrage, and it was designed to leverage our deepest human instincts. And so this is a crucial point that we need to bear in mind as we think about how we can manage things. This was a really nice social network analysis done on Facebook, published a few months ago by Neil Johnson and colleagues. There are many key points, many interesting points in this. But the one I want to leave you with today is illustrates the first point that I want to leave you with in terms of what it is that we can do about this problem. This is a map of, so the nodes are people, the nodes are people or accounts, and the size of them reflect the number of followers. The lines reflect the interactions between those accounts. The blue dots are pro-vaccine pages, the red dots are anti-vaccine pages, and the green dots are the most important pages of all. They're the people, the accounts where people have not yet taken a position on vaccines. And this study showed very clearly that the anti-vaccine, the vaccine critical sites were effectively reaching out into those undecided pages and entering into those undecided groups, whereas the blue pro-vaccine accounts were by and large talking to themselves. And so the first point I'd like everybody to take away from this presentation is, if we don't take a strategic approach, if we don't work from a proper, comprehensive, integrated strategy to tackling this problem, just as those who are making money out of vaccine critical misinformation are doing, then there is no way we're going to successfully combat this challenge. Just to organize our thinking, I'm moving now to solutions, and just to organize our thinking, we at UNICEF and within the Vaccine Demand Observatory that I'll present in a second, organize our approach to the impact of COVID-19 on immunization programs through three key themes. First is tracking and assessing misinformation in near real time, understanding how to address that. Secondly is understanding potential hesitancy and hopefully demand for new vaccines, including any SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, but also the new oral OPV vaccine coming through. And the third one is using social listening approaches to help us understand and potentially mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the provision of, the access to, and also demand for immunization services. It's important when we start to build a strategy that we understand the key questions that we want to address, that we want to ask. Now I'm going to flip to solutions, and I want to spend 3 minutes talking to you about the Vaccine Demand Observatory, which is an initiative that UNICEF has kicked off with 3 partners, but that UNICEF is already starting to coordinate through the Vaccination Demand Hub with other agencies, other multilaterals, the Demand Hub specifically with WHO, Gavi, CDC, and BMGF, but with other partners within there, including our partner Sabin today. Goods Project, which is a US not-for-profit that is taking the lead in particular on developing a customizable social listening and analytics platform with dashboards that can be taken into countries and customized to countries' needs. We're working with First Draft on social listening, but also on developing the first steps towards a learning academy to help develop infodemic managers. Those of you who've been following the infodemic conferences that the WHO has held, the infodemiology conferences that the WHO has held, have seen that one of the conclusions was that we need infodemic managers. I'll come back to this in a second. And also the Digital Interventions and Assessment Lab, in particular with Yale Institute for Global Health, a center of expertise in the behavioral science of vaccine decision making. We want to start designing and rapid testing messages. But what is really important about this initiative is that this is not some global initiative that is going to do global social listening and develop global messages. We are working to develop the tools, the technical support, the resources, etc., that a country would need to implement their own social listening and engagement strategy. Now, as I explain a few of these pieces of the Demand Observatory, I'd be very interested to hear if you have any thoughts about what you would like to get, what support you would need, content, tools, training, etc., that would help you in your work tackling disinformation. Please use the chat feature. The first deliverable that I mentioned is a cloud-based platform that will enable a country to funnel different data sources, traditional media, which is mostly digital, or we can get a lot of it digital, all the online media, not just the classic platforms, but blogs, search functions, chatbots, YouReport, etc. But we also want to see how we can plug in real-world data, analog data if necessary. The idea being that when you can get all of that data into a single data lake, you can really make sense of it now through the powerful algorithms that we can develop that can help us really tease the signals out of the noise. We'll be working on developing algorithms specifically for vaccination-related concerns, questions, conversations, algorithms that we hope will detect not just sentiment, but intentionalities, for example. And that idea is to make it as easy as possible through a visualization in dashboards for that infodemic manager to start to make sense of it, to start to consolidate it into insights, recommendations, intelligence that they're then able to feed to those in the field, those doing their risk communication, community engagement, communications, advocacy, etc. That infodemic manager, one of my colleagues at CDC, Liz Wilhelm, calls a unicorn, and that's stuck. I think we're all going to be wearing unicorn t-shirts soon. We're coordinating closely. We're hoping to make the first step towards putting some training out there for these unicorns, but we imagine that this will really, that training will really become a joint effort down the track. Secondly, we want countries to have a proper operational framework, a full strategy that covers all of the steps that are necessary to couple effective social listening with rumor assessment, development of actionable insights to those to the actions in the field, and to outcome tracking. We're tentatively calling this the mascot method. There's a step of preparation, information ecosystem analysis, understanding where the conversations are, who's in them, what channels are they on, what's being said, building the system, and setting up the monitoring, as I touched upon, assessing information, the misinformation, finding the gaps, understanding, deciding whether or not to address misinformation, because as you've seen, addressing it can potentially backfire, developing situational insights, and then feeding all of that into the activities in the field and having really good outcome tracking. And so the idea is that this framework would really be the backbone of that integrated misinformation management strategy. Let me just say here at the end, I will be announcing, but we are close to publishing a vaccine misinformation management guide, which will have all of this content with a lot more detail, solidly referenced throughout, available, we hope, in the very near future, and we'll make sure that everybody's made aware of that when it becomes available. With the Yale Institute for Global Health, but also with the partners PGP and First Draft, we're looking at how we can develop a workflow that would allow us to understand the issues, the general misinformation, the specific narratives, draft and design messages, and I'll come to this in a minute. We can actually inoculate people against misinformation, rapid A/B test it, customize the content for the channels where it's going to be, really understanding what it is people are looking at, what they're viewing, and then getting that out there. So now I'm going to spend another, that's been 25. I'm going to spend another 3 minutes on what we can do, and then I'm going to be quiet. So I want to look at three key pillars. We can essentially inoculate people. This is an emerging science against misinformation in general and specific disinformation narratives. We can get out there and set the agenda, and we can do things to control the spread of misinformation. This is an algorithm that I won't go into today, but as I touched upon, we need to be able to decide whether or not we're going to address misinformation. First of all, we can inoculate people against misinformation in general. This is called pre-bunking. I will draw your attention to the Debunking Handbook 2020 in a minute, which contains a background, a really good idea, explanation of the difference between pre-bunking and debunking. We have an online course from our partners, First Draft, that any of you can take tomorrow, that you can share with your families to start to build a level of baseline immunity against misinformation. A game that was just released a couple of weeks ago from Cambridge University, from the UK Cabinet Office and other partners, that is based on another game that's been shown to effectively inoculate people against misinformation. We have a randomized trial of a curriculum for primary school students that was performed in, I think, over 120 sites in Uganda that showed a very clear and significant effect on primary school students' ability to think more critically about health claims and make informed health decisions. And it's also available for adults. There is a methodology for debunking. I've run a little bit too far, so I'm not going to go into it today, but this is in the debunking handbook there. I'll share this on Twitter afterwards. You lead with the fact, you make sure it's clear, resonant, and sticky. You provide a misinformation alert. You can give the misinformation in a weakened form, but only once, because as we saw, familiarity breeds truth. You alert people that there are misleading tactics coming up. Then you point out the way that people are being deliberately deceived, either by highlighting the misleading tactics that are being used. There's a whole fantastic taxonomy developed by John Cook, Steve Lewandowski and colleagues that you can look at. Or, and I think this is important for vaccination, by highlighting the underlying agenda, the hidden agenda that people have, the hidden motives that people have for developing and disseminating that disinformation, which in general is either to monetize, to politicize, or to polarize. And then you provide the fact again, because you need to fill the gap that you've created by removing the myth. I'm going to have to move quickly now. We need to get out there and set the agenda. We need to be developing content that is resonant, that meets people's needs. It should be cataloged. It should be placed in content hubs at country level, at regional level. It needs to be accessible and sticky. We need to amplify the voices out there that are trusted, and we need to galvanize new trusted voices, healthcare workers, youth, religious leaders, etc. We need more voices in the conversation, more trustworthy voices. We can empower journalists. There are reporters toolkits out there that empower journalists, help journalists to identify and understand misinformation. Fact checking is fundamental. We can provide reference experts for those journalists, so it's easy for them to get the access to the science of the issue that they're addressing. We can push social media platforms and support them to control the spread of disinformation at a structural level, to redirect people to when there are searches for vaccines, to reduce the visibility of disinformation, misinformation, to demonetize it, to even deplatform those accounts that are making a lot of money out of it and having a real impact. We can limit the spread through limiting message forwarding, etc. There are different things that can be done. Let's, for example, we had new policies from Facebook announced just recently. Let's hope that those policies will start to have this impact on the spread of disinformation, of vaccine disinformation. So I'm going to stop now. I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts. I would have loved to get into the inoculation in a bit more depth, but I had to set the scene. You have that debunking handbook that will tell you that we can inoculate people, show you how we can inoculate people against misinformation, and that what I want to leave you with is that we should also be thinking in long term, how do we build innate immunity in communities, starting at school level against misinformation through some of the strategies that I've shown you. Strategy is my first point. This will not work if the approach is ad hoc reactive responses, which often, almost always, are not sufficient and may actually backfire. And lastly, and this is the most important point, if you remember only one thing from my presentation today, our job through social listening is to be able to listen through that fog of disinformation, to hear the questions and concerns that people have about routine immunization, about new vaccines coming up, and to respond to those questions through trusted voices in a way that will make people feel heard, that will reassure people and make them feel heard. That is more important than inoculating people against specific disinformation rumors. Change starts at home. I mentioned that public online guide. You can all take that tomorrow from First Draft, and the Misinformation Management Field Guide is coming very soon. And if you stay tuned to this series of webinars, we'll let you know soon when that is available. Thank you all very much.
All right, we are going to switch now over back to the slides real quick and continue the last of this presentation. Liz, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Jamie, and appreciate everyone sticking with us. It's been great to see all of your comments and questions. I just want to note that we are actually recording them all down. Since we only have about a minute left, we'll be sending them to the presenters of this webinar to answer, and we'll be posting them on the Boost community platform. So definitely check that link for answers to those questions, along with links to more resources, which I've projected here on the screen. I've also added them to the chat as well. But again, would encourage you to view the whole series on Sabin's YouTube channel. But yeah, with that, I know we have just a little bit of time left. I just wanted to thank everyone for your participation today. We really appreciated it. Over to you, Chika.
Very long, but very interesting. And I think the slides were not very clear. So we really need all this information so that people can go and check the slides later. There's so many questions, so many comments on the screen, on the chat box. So let me just read a few of them so that we're already running late. He said, Oluchi, Jane, Rebecca says, sensitization and capacity building of healthcare workers slides. Okay, nice one. Then again, some people are complaining that they cannot hear and they cannot see. Somebody said, Bufu Abarosi Mala, please forgive me for murdering your name. I agree with Martha. I think the right information should be shared with community to avoid mistrust. You know, there's so many things that I take from this is information, misinformation, disinformation. Wow. You know, one is the right information. The second one is giving the wrong information, but not intentionally. And then the last one is intentionally giving the wrong information. And then we now hear things like inoculation. Wow. You know, so we really need to go to these slides to see, you know, and then training. Daniel Haruna talked about training, films, communication tools that can easily be understood. Some of this thing about social media and all that cannot really work when it comes to some of our rural communities. You know, so we're looking at other things, but he mentioned also that we can talk about working with the youth, working with different groups. But before you can work with this group, they have to be trained. You know, sensitization. Jessica,
so,
sensitization and capacity. Yeah? I can hear you.
Chika, unfortunately, we're running out of time. And yeah, so we will have to close this session because the next session is about to start. So, and there are fantastic questions and fantastic comments from the participants. You can see they're still pouring in, but as Liz said, I think we can all put them together and then you know, they can be sent to Elizabeth and Sarah, and they can respond, and we can get back to all the participants. So I would now like to thank everybody for being here, and thank you very much, Sarah and Liz. It was a fantastic presentation, and I think everybody enjoyed it, and they were very, very engaged. And so over to you, Chika, to close the session.
Oh, thank you very much, Sabin Institute. It was a very rich, robust presentation. And then there's so much, please, we really, I wish there was a way we could go back to this and, you know, really tackle it to get a lot of things out of this. But anyway, until we meet again, good night, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. This session is closing, but not everything is closing. Thank you very much, everybody. It was very robust and very nice. Good night.
Thank you.
And then I want to take my repertoire. Tahiri, he's there writing and making sure that everything will come out right. I want to celebrate you as well. The behind the scenes repertoire. Thank you.